Many people today believe that aliens visited Earth thousands of years ago and created human beings. They point to the Anunnaki, mysterious figures from ancient Sumerian tablets, as proof. But the truth is, the Anunnaki were not ancient astronauts. They were mythological beings, symbolic characters used by ancient people to represent natural forces, like sky, water, fertility, storms, agriculture, what they understood at the time to be the fundamental forces of life. To say they came from the sky, you have to ask, what was the sky to ancient people? They didn't know they were standing on a planet. They didn't know the stars were suns, or that the sun was a star. They didn't imagine a vast universe full of galaxies. That wasn't their framework. To them, the sky was a solid dome with lights, stars moving in patterns. They thought of them as holes in the ceiling, and the light shining through came from a single great source. So when they said these gods or beings came from the sky, they didn't mean space. They meant from that higher light source, a symbolic world above ours, a divine realm. Not Mars, not Nibiru, not another galaxy. But somewhere along the way, that symbolic worldview got twisted. It started with the misinterpretation, and possibly intentional mistranslation of the Sumerian and Babylonian texts. The Enuma Elish and Epic of Gilgamesh were misunderstood, oversimplified, and compared to the Book of Genesis. And when you flatten the stories, strip them of nuance, and ignore their symbolic meaning, sure, they sound similar. Floods, gods, creation myths. But if you actually dive into the details, if you learn the languages, study the culture, and understand the ancient cosmology, you'll see just how different these stories really are. The Enuma Elish is not about humans being created as slaves for aliens. It's about the cosmic struggle between chaos and order, Tiamat and Marduk, represented through symbolic storytelling. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't about ancient alien DNA. It's a story about mortality, fear of death, and the search for spiritual wisdom. These stories weren't history. They were metaphor. They were teaching tools, spiritual blueprints, not scientific records. And then came Zechariah Sitchin. He wasn't a linguist, he wasn't a historian, but he claimed to translate these ancient texts and told the world that the Anunnaki were alien scientists from a planet called Nibiru, here to mine gold and engineer human beings as slaves. But no real scholar agrees with him. His translations don't hold up. The tablets don't say what he said they do. There's no mention of space travel, no DNA experiments, no alien planets. But that didn't matter. His story spread anyway because it was compelling. It was fun. It made people feel like there was a hidden truth out there that mainstream science was hiding. And shows like Ancient Aliens only made it worse, taking visual similarities and weaving entire fictional histories out of them, while real archaeology and real understanding of myth got buried under pseudoscience. But here's the thing. The myths were never about the stars out there. They were about the stars in here. They were maps of human transformation, stories of how we overcome chaos in ourselves, how we find order, meaning, connection, and unity. The gods were reflections of us, our fears, our instincts, our higher potentials. They weren't coming down in spacecraft. They were rising up through us. And the real tragedy is we've replaced those deep teachings with cheap theories. We've lost the meaning in the symbols. And now we chase shadows. We argue about who built the pyramids instead of asking what the pyramids symbolized. We debate whether aliens wrote our scriptures instead of decoding what those stories are really trying to awaken in us. The ancient alien theory doesn't uncover the past. It buries it under fantasy. Because if we take the myths literally, they fall apart. But if we take them seriously, something entirely different happens. We start to see ourselves in them. We start to understand that they were always about us. Our place in the universe, our transformation, our journey from darkness to light. So if you're ready to stop looking for spaceships and start discovering real wisdom, if you're ready to move past fake history and unlock what the ancient world was actually trying to tell us, then keep watching. Because this story isn't about aliens, it's about you. Many of the oldest stories we've inherited, from the Bible to the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish, weren't written to tell us what happened in the past. They were never meant to be historical or scientific. They're symbolic. They're myths. And they were designed to describe something far more important than events. They describe us, the human experience, our inner world, our psychological and spiritual evolution. Take the story of Eden. It's not about two people disobeying a rule and ruining paradise for everyone. It's about the moment we became self-aware, the moment consciousness shifted from innocence to duality. Eating from the tree of knowledge wasn't a sin, it was a transformation. Before that, Adam and Eve lived in unity, in a state of pure presence, unaware of separation. But once they ate the fruit, they saw difference. They felt shame. That's the birth of ego, the fall into self-consciousness, into the illusion that we are separate from each other and from the world. That illusion continues in Cain and Abel, the division between brothers. One is favored, the other feels rejected. That's not just a family drama. It's a reflection of our own inner conflict. The parts of us that feel seen and the parts that feel cast out. And when one side dominates the other, when ego kills connection, we become divided from ourselves. In the Enuma Elish, the world is born from a war between the gods. A great primordial being, Tiamat, is torn apart to create the sky and the earth. On the surface, it sounds brutal. But it's not about gods fighting in space. It's an ancient metaphor for how order emerges from chaos. The old self, the unconscious, undivided, formless self, must break apart for new consciousness to take shape. That myth describes a psychological process. To become who we are, we have to leave behind what we were. The same pattern appears in Noah's flood, which parallels the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In both stories, a righteous man is warned, builds a boat, survives a world-ending flood, and repopulates the land. But the flood isn't about a literal catastrophe. It's about washing away the inner corruption, the false self, the noise and chaos of division. It's a symbol of cleansing, of resetting, of beginning again from a place of unity. Then we reach the Tower of Babel. Humanity tries to unite, builds a tower to reach the heavens, and is scattered by God. But the scattering of languages isn't a historical event. It's a metaphor for how division, ego, pride, separation, breaks down our ability to understand each other. The tower was never finished because we hadn't yet overcome the illusion of being separate. But the story also hints at a deeper truth. If humanity were to truly unite, nothing would be impossible. That's not a warning. That's the goal. Abraham's story, like Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh or Marduk in the Enuma Elish, is not about one man and his descendants. Abraham represents the inner seeker, the one who leaves the familiar behind, follows the unknown, and is transformed through trials. His journey through conflict, sacrifice, and revelation maps the same inner path, of letting go of the old identity and stepping into the mystery. The gods he speaks to don't behave like perfect beings, because they're not literal gods. They're personifications of cosmic forces, psychological energies, reflections of the self in its different stages of growth. And that brings us to Jesus, not as a historical man with magic powers, but as a symbol of the awakened human, the realization of our highest potential. His life, death, and resurrection mirror the oldest mythological themes: the dying and rising God, the descent into darkness, and the return in light. He is the embodiment of unity, with self, with others, with the divine. His 12 disciples aren't just followers. They represent the different aspects of consciousness that must be integrated on the path to wholeness. All these stories, from Babylon to Canaan, from Sumer to Galilee, follow the same arc: a fall from unity, a descent into division, and a journey back to wholeness. They're not about gods coming from space. The ancient people who told these stories didn't even know they were on a planet. To them, the sky was a dome, and stars were holes in the roof where divine light shined through. The heavens weren't outer space. They were a higher realm of consciousness, a spiritual reality that we access not through technology, but through transformation. So when modern interpretations claim that the Enuma Elish or the Epic of Gilgamesh prove aliens created us, or that Genesis is a rewritten Sumerian history, they're missing the point entirely. These stories weren't meant to explain biology or physics. They were maps for the soul. They were written in symbols because the truths they point to aren't facts, they're experiences. And when we mistake myth for history or try to turn metaphor into science, we flatten their meaning and lose their power. These stories are about us, about our fears and hopes, our ego and our spirit, our journey through darkness into light. They aren't literal, and they were never meant to be. They are mirrors, and the deeper you look into them, the more of yourself you begin to see.